Hi, welcome to Geography 2. My name is Professor Adrienne Johanna, and I look forward to working with you as we examine the various cultural elements of geography. The word geography, which was invented by the ancient Greek scholar by the name of Eratosthenes, is based on two Greek words. Geo means earth, and graphy means to write. Geography is a diverse academic discipline. Sometimes it's referred to as the study of place, but it's so much more than that. Knowing where countries and important places are located is useful, but it's only a beginning. A bit like knowing some introductory vocabulary when you start studying a foreign language. Knowing why places and things are where they are and what their location means in the past, present, and future, and how their location affects other places. Knowing these things brings us much closer to knowing what geography is really all about. Geographers study how things differ from place to place, the distributional and locational relationships of things around the world, what is sometimes called the spatial aspect of things. In this diagram, you can see that these things that geographers study are divided into three primary groups. The elements of physical geography are natural in origin, and for this reason, physical geography is sometimes called environmental geography. The elements of cultural geography are those of human endeavor. So this branch is sometimes referred to as human geography. The almost unlimited possible combinations of these various elements create the physical and cultural landscapes of the world that geographers study. The third branch that you see in the diagram is referred to as techniques, or what we sometimes refer to as geographic tools. These tools help geographers to visualize and display information for analysis. You can think of these as high-tech systems and tools that allow geographers to look for patterns and connections in the data. These include GIS, which stands for Geographic Information Systems. This is a computer-based mapping, analysis, and retrieval of location-based data. We also have GPS, which stands for Global Positioning System. This allows us to acquire real-time location information from a series of satellites in Earth's orbit. And remote sensing, which is the acquisition of data and imagery, again from the use of satellites or aircraft, such as aerial photography. To understand the scope of cultural geography, we must first agree on the meaning of culture, because many definitions exist, some broad and some narrow. Culture can be thought of as a total way of life held in common by a group of people, including such learned features as speech, ideology, behavior, livelihood, technology, and government. Culture defined in this way involves a communication system of acquired beliefs, memories, perceptions, traditions, and attitudes that serve to supplement and channel these instinctive behaviors. Culture, then, is represented by the ideas, materials, and institutions that people have invented and passed on to subsequent generations. These could include language, music, belief systems, gender roles, or moral codes. For example, those that are prescribed in Confucianism, Islam, or Christianity. Geographers employ several basic concepts to explain why every place on Earth is in some ways unique and in some ways related to other locations. Two basic concepts relate to unique location: place and region. The remaining three concepts, scale, space, and connection, help explain how our locations are interrelated. Geographers describe place by identifying its location in a number of ways. The most straightforward way to describe a particular location is often by referring to its place name. A place name or toponym is the name that's given to a place on Earth. A place may be named for a person, perhaps it's the founder, or a famous person with no connection to the community, such as George Washington. Some settlers selected place names associated with religion, such as St. Louis and St. Paul, whereas other names derive from ancient history, such as Athens and Rome, or from earlier occupants of the place. These place names often directly reflect the spatial patterns of language, dialect, and ethnicity as well. And toponyms become part of the cultural landscape when they appear on signs and placards. Geographers also describe the location of a place through the concepts of site and situation. Site refers to the physical attributes of a location. This could include the soil, the vegetation, the water resources, topography, latitude, and elevation. The combination of physical features gives each place a distinctive character. Site factors have always been essential in selecting locations, particularly for settlement, although people have not always agreed on the attributes of a good site. Situation is a valuable way to indicate location for two primary reasons. First is it helps us find unfamiliar place by comparing its location with a familiar one. We give directions to people by referring to the situation of a place. For example, it's past the library next to the big oak tree. Situation also helps us understand the importance of a location. Many places are important because they are accessible to other places. Either they are close to a freeway with easy accessibility or near to a population center. On a larger scale, take for example the situation of Cairo. Cairo has become a center for the trading of goods and culture among Africa, Europe, and Asia. The sense of place that humans possess may apply to a larger area of Earth rather than to a specific point. An area of Earth defined by one or more distinctive characteristics is a region. So you can think of a culture region or region as a grouping of similar places or the functional union of places to form a spatial unit. Maps in particular provide an essential tool for describing and revealing culture regions. And I'm sure you've heard the saying, one picture is worth 1,000 words. Well, a well-prepared map is worth at least 10,000 words to the geographer. Maps are valuable tools, particularly because they so concisely portray spatial patterns in culture. Three types of regions are recognized by geographers: formal, functional, and vernacular. Let's start with formal regions. A formal or uniform region is an area inhabited by people who have one or more cultural traits in common. So we identify these regions based upon that sameness. It could be physical characteristics like climate conditions, type of vegetation, soil, or it could be based on human characteristics such as religion, language, or some other human attribute. If we look at the United States and base it upon the dominant types of religious systems, we can see distinct different regions that show up among the 50 states. One region that shows up quite a bit is in the Southeast, where we have the religion of Southern Baptist, a form of Protestantism. This is very dominant here. Sometimes it's also referred to as the Bible Belt of the United States because of the strong literal interpretation of the Bible that is used in the Southern Baptist religion. We also see a distinct region on the west where the Mormon religion is dominant within the state of Utah and some surrounding counties of other nearby states. And certainly the region along the borderland between the United States and Mexico, where the Spanish Catholic influence is very strong, can also be seen. This dates back to when the Spanish settled in the Rio Grande Valley by the early 1600s in that part of New Mexico. Functional or nodal regions are areas that have been organized to function either politically, socially, or economically. Functional regions have nodes as well, or what are called focal or central points. This is where the functions are coordinated and directed. So if we think of California, for example, an independent state, then its nodal point or nodal region would be Sacramento, where all of the functions, as I said, are coordinated and directed from. Many functional regions have clearly defined borders. Take, for example, a farm. A farm includes all land owned or leased by the farmer. The border of this functional region will probably be clearly marked by fences, hedges, or walls. But not all functional regions have fixed, precise borders. A good example is a daily newspaper's circulation area. The node for the paper would be the plant where it's produced. Every morning, trucks move out of the plant to distribute the paper throughout the city. The newspaper may have a sales area that extends into the city's suburbs, local communities, nearby towns, even rural areas. There, its sales area will most likely overlap the sales territories of competing newspapers published in other cities. So it would be futile to try to define borders for such an area. In other words, how would you draw a sales area boundary for the New York Times? We know its Sunday edition is sold in some quantity, even in California, thousands of miles from its node, and it's published simultaneously in different cities. Vernacular regions emerge from peoples perception of a place. Some vernacular regions are based on physical environmental features. For example, there are many regions simply called the Valley. Wikipedia, in fact, lists more than 30 different regions within the US and Canada that are referred to as such. In the 1980s, the Valley became synonymous with the San Fernando Valley in Southern California and became associated with a type of landscape, a person, and a way of speaking. For example, a white teenage girl called the Valley Girl living in the suburbs and speaking Val speak. A useful way to identify a perceptual region is to get a description of the region from the people living in it and to draw a mental map, which is based on a person's impressions of what is in the place. These impressions can be based on one's individual ideas, impressions of these locations, whether it's direct experience or whether it's based on written or visual representations of actual locations, on hearsay, or based on people's imaginations, or a combination of these sources. Although geographers study every scale from the individual to the entire Earth, increasingly they are concerned with global scale patterns and processes. Globalization refers to the expansion of economic, political, and cultural activities to the point that they become global in scale and impact. But what does this really mean? People and economies throughout the world are interconnected as never before. The implication, however, is that globalization and the diffusion of ideas and innovations will work to homogenize peoples, breaking down culture regions and eventually producing a global culture. For instance, fast food restaurants, service stations, and retail chains deliberately create a visual appearance that varies among locations as little as possible. That way, customers know what to expect, regardless of where in the world they happen to be. As more people become aware of elements of global culture and aspire to possess them, local cultural beliefs, forms, and traits are threatened with extinction. The survival of local cultures' distinctive beliefs, forms, and traits may be threatened by interaction with such social customs as wearing jeans and Nike shoes, or consuming Coca-Cola and McDonald's, and communicating using cell phones and computers. A few people living in very remote regions of the world may be able to obtain all of their daily necessities within that region, but most economic activities undertaken in one region are influenced by interaction with decision makers in other regions. So globalization of the economy has been led primarily by transnational corporations, sometimes called multinational corporations. These large transnational corporations are conducting research. They operate factories and sell products in many countries, not just where its headquarters and principal shareholders are located. Geographers also study the arrangement of people and activities found in space, and they try to understand why those people and activities are distributed as such. The arrangement of a feature in space is known as its distribution, and geographers identify three main properties of distribution across Earth: density, concentration, and pattern. Density measures the quantity of anything. This could be people, buildings, animals, trees, traffic, per unit area. Therefore, it's not simply a count of items, but of items in relation to the space in which they are found. It remains the same no matter how the items are distributed. The area could be measured in square kilometers, square miles, hectares, acres, or any other unit of area. Remember that a large number of a feature does not necessarily lead to a high density. Again, density involves two measures: the number of a feature and the land area. China is the country with the largest number of people, approximately 1.4 billion, but it does not have the world's highest density. The Netherlands, for example, has only 17 million people, but its density of 508 persons per square kilometer is much higher than China's 144 persons per square kilometer. China may have a large population, but it also has a much larger land area of 9.6 million square kilometers compared to only 42,000 square kilometers for the Netherlands. Concentration, on the other hand, is a statement about how near or far features are spread over the Earth's surface. In other words, the amount of spread of a phenomenon over an area. It tells us not how many or how much, but how far things are either spread out or are clustered together, for instance. If they are close together spatially, they are considered to be clustered or closely spaced. If they are spread out, they are dispersed or scattered, meaning widely spaced. For example, the distribution of people across the United States is increasingly dispersed. The total number of people living in the US is growing slowly, less than 1% per year, and the land area is essentially unchanged. But the population distribution is changing from relatively clustered in the Northeast to more evenly dispersed across the country. Understanding the difference between density and concentration became essential during the COVID-19 pandemic. Look back and remember a room you were in at a social gathering prior to the pandemic. How many people were in the room? That number divided by the size of the room was the density. Were people spread evenly throughout the room, or were they huddled together in one part of the room? That was the concentration, either clustered or dispersed. Now, to stem the spread of a contagious airborne disease such as COVID-19, the number of people in the same space must be limited, that is, the density reduced, as shown in diagram B. And to stop a COVID-19 outbreak from spreading, people were asked to maintain a distance of 6 feet from each other. That is, the concentration must be dispersed, as shown in diagram C. In other words, people who practice social distancing, also called physical distancing, are keeping a safe space between each other in order to reduce the risk of spreading the highly contagious disease. The third property of distribution is pattern, which describes the geometric or spatial arrangement and design of objects. Like dispersion, pattern refers to the distribution, but that reference emphasizes design rather than spacing. The distribution of towns along a railroad or houses along a street may be seen as linear. A centralized pattern may involve items that are concentrated around a single node. A random pattern may be the best description of an unstructured or irregular distribution. Lastly, geographers are concerned with the various means by which connections occur, specifically through diffusion and interaction. A new idea, phenomenon, or some other innovation will originate at a node. This is known as a hearth. And from there, it spreads across space from one place to another through the process of diffusion. Geographers document the location of nodes of innovation and the processes by which diffusion carries that new idea, new phenomenon, or new thing elsewhere. And this could also include diseases. Torsten Hagstrand was a native and resident of Sweden, and he did his doctoral research on cultural diffusion. And his findings were published in 1953. His work on diffusion is significant because it's based on models and statistical techniques. As a result, it was the basis for many theories and introduced a scientific perspective into cultural geography. So geographers today have drawn heavily on the research of Hagstrand, recognizing several different kinds of diffusion. Geographers distinguish between primarily relocation diffusion and expansion diffusion. Relocation diffusion occurs when individuals or groups with a particular idea or practice migrate from one location to another, spreading it to their new homeland. Religions frequently spread this way. An example is the migration of Christianity with European settlers who came to America. The entire process of European overseas migration, lasting from about 1500 to 1950, represented the most important episode of relocation diffusion in all of history. Another example would be when immigrants to the American colonies brought along crops and farming techniques, building styles, or concepts of government alien to their new home. The process of relocation diffusion helps us understand the distribution of AIDS within the U.S. For example, AIDS first arose largely among male homosexuals and intravenous drug users who shared needles. Geographically, early concentrations of AIDS occurred in places with high concentrations of these two subpopulations, such as San Francisco, New York, Los Angeles, and southern Florida. In 1981, virtually all people with AIDS were found in these three states or nodes. It has perhaps the most severe impact in inner city areas, but has cropped up in every region of the United States, increasingly appearing in the male and female heterosexual population. While the number of cases declined relatively rapidly in the original nodes during the 1990s, by 1993, however, these three states, and now Texas, accounted for half of the nation's new AIDS cases. At a national scale, the diffusion of AIDS in the United States through relocation halted after 1993 due to the rapid diffusion of preventative methods and medicines such as AZT. The rapid spread of these innovations, however, was an example of a different type of diffusion called expansion diffusion rather than relocation diffusion. In expansion diffusion, ideas spread throughout a population from area to area in a snowballing process so that the total number of knowers and the area of occurrence increase. Information about an innovation, for example, hybrid corn or TikTok or iPhone, may spread throughout a society, perhaps encouraged by local or mass media advertising, or new adopters of an ideology or way of life. For example, a new religious creed may be inspired or recruited by immigrant native converts. Expansion diffusion can be further divided into three subtypes. In hierarchical diffusion, ideas leapfrog from one important person to another or from one urban center to another, temporarily bypassing other persons or rural territory. In other words, this process involves the transferring of ideas first between larger places or prominent people, and only later to smaller or less important points or people. We can see hierarchical diffusion at work in everyday life by observing the acceptance of new modes of dress or hairstyles. For example, quickly spreading internationally between major cities and only later filtering down irregularly to smaller towns and rural areas. Another example of hierarchical diffusion would be the spread of the Christian faith in Europe from Rome as the principal center to provincial capitals and hence to smaller Roman settlements in largely pagan-occupied territories. By contrast, contagious diffusion involves the wave-like spread of ideas without regard to hierarchies, such as a contagious disease. Sometimes a specific trait is rejected, but the underlying idea is accepted, resulting in stimulus diffusion. For example, innovative features of Apple's iPhone and iPad have been adopted by competitors, but altered to fit with each of those competitors' unique products. Diffusion becomes weaker as a cultural innovation moves away from its point of origin. This trailing off phenomenon is called distance decay. That is, diffusion decreases with distance, and time is also a factor. An innovation will usually be accepted most thoroughly in the areas closest to where it originates, and also because innovations take increasing time to spread out. In the contemporary world, distance decay is much less severe because of space-time compression. That is, the reduction in the time it takes to diffuse something to a distant place as a result of improved communications and transportation systems. When connections happen between cultural groups, there are several results that occur. One is assimilation. The cultural features of one group may come to dominate the culture of the assimilated group. Or acculturation may result. Changes may be experienced by both of the interacting cultural groups, but the two groups still retain distinctive cultures. Whereas with syncretism, the two cultural groups come together to form a new culture. To be connected with another place in the modern world, we may not need to travel at all. Ideas that originate in a hearth are now able to diffuse rapidly to other areas through communication networks. Interaction takes place through a network, which is a chain of communication that interconnects people, things, and places. Modern networks make it possible for us to know more about what is happening elsewhere in the world, and space-time compression makes it possible for us to know it even sooner. Distant places seem less remote and more accessible to us than ever before. With better connections between places, we are exposed to a constant barrage of cultural traits and economic initiatives from people in other regions. And perhaps we may adopt some of those cultural and economic elements.